You should have thought about money before you stopped being useful. Preston Hale said it like he was commenting on the weather, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, the other fixing the cuff of his spotless white shirt. Celeste Brooks stood across from him in their kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, staring at her phone as if the screen had made a mistake. $12.43. That was all that remained in the joint account. Last night, there had been $184,000 in it. Money from the sale of their first condo. Money she had helped save. Money she had earned back when Preston still called her brilliant instead of difficult. For a few seconds, the only sound in the house was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint traffic outside their Chicago townhouse. Celeste refreshed the banking app once. Then again, the number did not change. Her thumb hovered over the transfer history, and there it was, a string of withdrawals made before sunrise, each one moving thousands of dollars into an account she did not recognize. Her stomach tightened, not from surprise, but from the cruelty of how carefully he had done it. Preston leaned against the marble island like a man who had already won. "I was going to tell you after my meeting," he said. "But since you're up, we might as well be adults about this." Celeste slowly lifted her eyes. "You emptied our account." He gave a small sigh, the kind he used when he wanted her to feel unreasonable. "I protected my assets." "Our assets," she said, her voice low. "That account has both our names on it." Preston's mouth curved, but there was no warmth in it. "Celeste, please. Let's not pretend you were the one carrying this life." The words landed harder than the missing money. She thought of all the nights she had sat at that same kitchen table, reviewing his contracts while he slept, the clients she had introduced him to, the rent she had covered when his first firm delayed his bonus, the dinners she had skipped because he needed one more custom suit for one more room, full of men he wanted to impress. Back then, he had called it teamwork. Now he called it his life. Celeste's hand trembled around the phone, but she did not cry. Not because it did not hurt. It hurt so much her throat felt locked shut. But something in her had gone very still. Preston pushed a folder across the counter. Divorce papers. Already printed. Already tabbed where he wanted her to sign. "Take the offer," he said. "I'll cover 3 months of rent. That is more than fair." Celeste looked down at the papers, then at the wedding ring on her finger, catching the pale morning light like a lie that had finally run out of shine. Preston thought $12.43 was proof she had nowhere to go. What he did not know was that Celeste had survived smaller rooms, colder looks, and harder mornings long before she ever took his name. And as she opened the transfer history and quietly took the first screenshot, Preston had no idea he had just handed her the beginning of his own collapse. Before Preston Hale ever learned how to look down at Celeste Brooks, he used to look at her like she was the smartest person in the room. That was the part that made the morning feel so cruel. As Celeste stood in the kitchen with the divorce papers between them, her mind pulled her back to a different version of him, a younger Preston in a wrinkled navy suit, sitting across from her in a crowded coffee shop on Wabash Avenue, talking too fast about the kind of career he wanted. He had ambition back then, but not much else. No corner office, no polished townhouse, no wealthy friends laughing too loudly over steak dinners. Just a cheap laptop, a stack of student loans, and a dream he dressed up in confidence. Celeste had believed in that dream. She had stayed up past midnight reading his proposals, fixing the language in his client pitches, catching mistakes he was too tired to see. When his first big meeting came, she ironed his shirt because his hands were shaking too badly to do it right. "You make me better," he had told her that night, holding her face like the words meant something sacred. And Celeste believed him. She was not naive. She knew the world did not always clap for women like her. She knew how often a black woman had to prove herself twice and still get called lucky. In boardrooms, men repeated her ideas louder and received the praise. At dinner parties, wives asked where she got her dress before asking what she did for a living. Even Preston's colleagues had a way of smiling at her like she was decoration, not strategy. But Preston was supposed to know better. He had seen her build budgets out of chaos. He had watched her talk nervous founders out of bad deals. He had taken her advice, used her contacts, walked through doors she helped open, and somehow convinced himself he had found the key alone. The change did not happen all at once. It came in small, quiet insults. He stopped asking what she thought and started saying he had it handled. He introduced her as "my wife," with a soft squeeze on her shoulder, but never mentioned that she had helped shape half the deals he bragged about. When she corrected him in private, He sighed. Celeste, not everything needs to become a debate. When she questioned a risky investment, he smiled like she was being emotional. You do not understand the pressure I am under. But she did understand. That was the insult. She understood too well. Standing in their kitchen now, Celeste looked at the man he had become, clean shirt, cold eyes, divorce folder open like a business plan. Preston was not just leaving her. He was trying to erase every mile she had walked beside him, then charge her rent for the road. You really think I built nothing, she said softly. Preston glanced at his watch. I think you are about to find out how expensive pride can be. Celeste looked down at her phone, at the screenshots already saved, and for the first time that morning, her breathing steadied. He wanted a poor ex-wife because a poor ex-wife would be easier to silence. But Celeste had learned long ago that silence and surrender were not the same thing. Celeste did not find out about Madisonville because Preston confessed. Men like Preston did not confess when they thought they were in control. They managed information. They released only what made them look reasonable. That morning, after he left for his meeting with the same calm smile he wore in front of clients, Celeste stayed in the kitchen until the sound of his car faded down the street. Then she walked through the house slowly, not because she was searching for pain, but because she knew pain often left receipts. His study smelled like leather, expensive cologne, and the black coffee he never finished. The room had always been his little kingdom, framed law degrees on the wall, a glass desk, a locked cabinet he thought made him look important. His iPad sat beside a stack of contract folders, still open from whatever message had made him forget to close it. Celeste almost walked away. There was a time when she would have called that privacy. But privacy was not the same thing as secrecy, and secrecy had just emptied their bank account before breakfast. She touched the screen. An email thread opened under Madisonville's name. Celeste knew the name. Everyone around Preston knew Madison. Blonde, polished, always in sharp little suits, always laughing a second too long at Preston's jokes during firm events. Celeste had once told herself not to be petty, not to become the kind of wife who saw danger in every pretty woman. Now she read Madison's words and felt something colder than jealousy move through her chest. Once she is broke, she will sign anything. Celeste stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. Not because Madison existed, not because Preston had lied, but because they had discussed her like a problem to be solved, like a chair to be removed from a room. Below it were messages about a penthouse in River North, furniture deliveries, a dinner reservation for Saturday night, even a joking note about how Preston should celebrate his freedom properly once the papers were signed. Celeste set the iPad down and pressed both hands against the desk. Her fingers trembled, but her face stayed still. She thought about every late night Preston had claimed he was buried in work. Every weekend he had said he needed space to think. Every time he came home smelling like a restaurant she had never been invited to and kissed her forehead like kindness could cover disrespect. Then another message appeared on the screen. From Preston. She has no leverage. I moved the money. She will fold. For a moment, the house felt too quiet, like even the walls were ashamed of what they had heard. Celeste picked up her phone and took pictures of the emails, one by one, steadying her wrist each time. When she reached the last message, she noticed an attachment named Settlement Strategy. Inside was a draft of the same divorce offer he had pushed across the counter, with notes and Madison's neat comments on the side. Do not give her time to think. Celeste almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. They had mistaken her silence for confusion. They had mistaken her hurt for weakness. She walked back to the kitchen, opened the divorce folder again, and slid off her wedding ring. It landed on the counter with a small, clean sound. Preston thought she had just lost a husband. But in that moment, Celeste understood she had finally lost the last reason to protect him. Celeste did not chase Preston with questions. She did not call Madison. She did not throw the divorce folder across the room, even though part of her wanted to watch those pages scatter like the years he had wasted. Instead, she stood in the kitchen with her wedding ring on the counter, breathing through the kind of pain that makes a person either collapse or become very, very clear. Outside, Chicago moved on like nothing had happened. A delivery truck groaned past the townhouse. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The neighbor across the street dragged his trash cans to the curb. Ordinary life kept happening while Celeste quietly understood that her marriage had ended long before Preston printed those papers. She wiped her hands on the sleeves of her gray sweater, walked upstairs, and opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand. Behind an old birthday card from her mother and a box of receipts sat a small black USB drive. Preston had seen that drawer 100 times and never cared enough to ask what was in it. That was one of his mistakes. Celeste took the drive to her laptop and plugged it in. Folder after folder appeared on the screen. Bank statements, screenshots, client contracts, tax records, consulting agreements, copies of checks she had deposited years before Preston started calling himself self-made. Her pulse beat hard in her ears, but her hands moved with purpose. She had not collected those files because she expected to be betrayed. At least, that was what she used to tell herself. The truth was quieter and sadder. Some part of her had known that love did not require blind trust, especially not with a man who kept asking her to prove loyalty while hiding pieces of himself. She opened one folder labeled Brooks Strategic Group. The name looked plain on the screen, almost too simple for what it had become. It had started as a side project after she left corporate finance. One client, then 3, then a founder in Atlanta who needed help cleaning up a messy budget before pitching investors, then a women-owned health technology company in Detroit, then a private equity consultant who referred her to people with money Preston spent years trying to impress. Celeste had built it at night, at the kitchen table, while Preston thought she was browsing recipes or watching old shows to pass the time. She built it during mornings when he left without saying goodbye. She built it between grocery runs, family obligations, and silent dinners where he talked over her like she had nothing useful to add. And because she had used her own accounts, her own name, her own contracts, and her own discipline, Preston had no claim to it. Not legally. Not morally. Not anymore. Celeste picked up her phone and called Darius Coleman. He answered on the third ring, his voice calm and low. "Celeste, are you all right?" She looked at the divorce papers on the counter, then at the bank screenshots saved on her phone. "He emptied the joint account," she said. There was a pause. Not shock. Not panic. Just the sound of a man fitting the last piece into a puzzle he had warned her about months ago. "Did you save the transfer records?" he asked. "Yes." "The emails?" "Yes." "The settlement draft?" Celeste swallowed. Madison commented on it. Darius exhaled slowly. "Then listen to me carefully. Do not argue with him. Do not threaten him. Do not give him any reason to clean up what he left behind." Celeste looked at the ring again, small and cold beside the coffee mug Preston had abandoned. "What do I do?" Darius said. "You let him believe you are scared. And while he is busy enjoying that, we document everything." For the first time since sunrise, Celeste sat down. Not because she was weak, because she was ready to work. Preston thought silence meant she had nothing left to say. He had no idea silence was the first language Celeste learned when she was preparing to win. By Saturday evening, Celeste had done exactly what Darius told her to do. She did not warn Preston. She did not correct his confidence. She let his messages sit on her phone, polite and controlled, as if a polite tone could make a trap less obvious. Preston asked her to meet at a restaurant in downtown Chicago, a polished place with low lighting, white tablecloths, and valet parking out front. He called it a civil conversation. Celeste knew better the moment she walked in. Preston was already seated near the window, wearing a charcoal suit and the expression of a man who expected gratitude for showing up. Beside him sat Madison Vale, blonde hair tucked behind one ear, red nails wrapped around a glass of sparkling water. Across from them was Preston's attorney, a thin man with silver glasses, and 2 people Celeste recognized from Preston's business circle. One of them, Martin Keller, was an investor Preston had been chasing for months. Celeste paused for half a second, then kept walking. Her black coat was simple. Her purse was old. Her face gave them nothing to feed on. Madison looked her up and down with a small smile. "Celeste," she said, sweet enough to sound rehearsed. "I am glad you came. This is healthier than dragging things out." Celeste sat down slowly. "I was told this was a private conversation." Preston folded his hands on the table. "It is private enough. Everyone here wants this handled maturely." Celeste glanced at Madison. "Everyone." Madison laughed softly, as if Celeste had made a harmless joke. "I know this is difficult. Losing a marriage, losing stability, losing the lifestyle. That would scare anyone." Preston did not stop her. That hurt more than Celeste expected, not because Madison's words mattered, but because Preston sat there allowing a woman who had mocked her in emails to speak like she was doing charity work. The waiter came by, and no one ordered food. That told Celeste everything. This was not dinner. This was pressure with candles on the table. Preston slid a folder toward her. The same clean tabs, the same insulting offer. 3 months of rent, he said. A small moving allowance. I will even let you keep the car until the lease ends. Madison tilted her head. That is generous, considering everything. Celeste rested her fingers on the edge of the folder. Her hand wanted to shake, but she pressed her thumb against the paper until it steadied. She thought about the empty account, the screenshots, Madison's comments, Preston's message saying she had no leverage. She thought about every time he had mistaken her dignity for dependence. And if I do not sign? Celeste asked. Preston leaned back. Then this becomes expensive, public, embarrassing. His voice softened, which somehow made it uglier. You do not want people asking how you will survive without me. For the first time all night, Celeste smiled. Not big, not warm, just enough to make Preston's eyes narrow. She closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. You should check what you actually own before you offer me scraps. The silence came fast. Madison stopped smiling. Preston stared at her like he was trying to find the frightened woman he had planned for. But she was not there anymore. Celeste stood, buttoned her coat, and looked at Martin Keller just long enough for him to remember where he had seen her name before. Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant without raising her voice. Preston laughed after she left, telling the table she was being dramatic. But before midnight, Martin received an email from his legal team with the name Brooks Strategic Group in the subject line, and Preston's perfect little dinner began to rot from the inside. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold sunlight that made every glass building in downtown Chicago look sharper than it was. Preston Hale walked into his firm carrying a leather briefcase, a fresh coffee, and the leftover confidence from Saturday night. He had spent Sunday telling himself Celeste was bluffing. That was all. A wounded woman trying to sound powerful because she had no real power left. Madison had said the same thing over brunch, tapping her red nails against her mimosa glass. She is trying to scare you because she is scared, she told him. Preston wanted to believe that, so he did. But the moment he stepped off the elevator, something felt wrong. The receptionist looked up too quickly, then looked away. 2 junior associates stopped talking when he passed. His assistant, Paige, stood outside his office with a folder hugged to her chest. Preston, she said carefully. Martin Keller called twice. He also asked whether you were still joining the 10 o'clock partner meeting. Preston frowned. Of course I am. Why would I not be? Paige did not answer fast enough. That was the first crack. At 10, Preston entered the conference room expecting the usual warm nods, the usual polished greetings, the usual quiet respect given to a man who was close to making managing partner. Instead, the room had gone still. Martin Keller sat at the far end of the table with 2 attorneys Preston did not recognize. Beside him was Evelyn Grant, one of the firm's senior partners, a woman who never wasted words or facial expressions. Preston smiled anyway. Looks serious, he said, taking his seat. No one laughed. Evelyn opened a folder. Preston, we need to discuss a financial disclosure issue related to your pending divorce. His jaw tightened, but he kept his tone smooth. That is a personal matter. One of the attorneys slid a document across the table. It became a professional matter when joint marital funds were moved into an account connected to a holding company tied to one of your client structures. Preston stared at the page. For half a second, the words did not arrange themselves into meaning. Then he saw the transfer dates, the amounts, the account trail he thought was complicated enough to stay quiet until after Celeste signed. His mouth went dry. This is being misunderstood. Martin leaned forward. Then help us understand why Brooks Strategic Group flagged the transaction during a risk review. Preston blinked. Brooks what? Evelyn studied him. Your wife's firm. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly. Preston gave a short laugh, but it came out wrong. Celeste does not have a firm. Martin's expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to make Preston feel smaller. Preston, Brooks Strategic Group has advised 3 companies in our current investment pipeline. They reviewed Keller Capital's compliance model last quarter. Their founder is well known in private circles. Preston looked down at the document again. Celeste Brooks, founder, chief executive officer. The name sat there in black ink, calm and undeniable. For years, he had heard that name across breakfast tables, tax forms, family invitations, and legal documents. He had never once imagined it could enter a boardroom before him and sit there with more authority than he had. Evelyn closed the folder. There is also a complaint regarding coercive settlement tactics and possible concealment of funds. Until this is reviewed, you are being removed from the Keller transaction. Preston's face burned. You cannot be serious. We are very serious, she said. His phone buzzed under the table. A message from Madison appeared. Is everything okay? Preston did not answer. He was too busy staring at the name he had spent years treating like nothing, while everyone in the room waited for him to explain how the woman he called dependent had just become the reason his career was shaking. The first hearing took place on a gray Thursday morning in a small courtroom on the 17th floor, the kind of room that did not care about charm, expensive watches, or who had the best table at a steakhouse. Celeste arrived 10 minutes early with Darius Coleman beside her, both of them quiet as they passed through security. She wore a simple black suit, small gold earrings, and her hair pulled back from her face. Nothing about her begged for sympathy. Nothing about her asked for attention. Preston noticed that immediately, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He walked in with his attorney and Madison just behind him, her coat draped over her shoulders like they were arriving at a charity event instead of a courtroom. Celeste saw Madison whisper something into Preston's ear before they sat down. He nodded, but his eyes kept moving toward the folder in Darius's hands. That folder had become a thing Preston could not stop watching. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The room settled into a silence so clean it made every paper shuffle sound important. Preston's attorney spoke first, painting him as a responsible husband trying to end a difficult marriage with dignity. He said the account transfer had been misunderstood. He said Preston had merely been organizing finances before a complicated separation. He said Celeste was successful, capable, and not financially vulnerable. Celeste listened without moving. The words should have made her angry, but instead they made her tired. There was something exhausting about hearing a man steal from you, then use your strength as proof that it did not matter. When Darius stood, his voice was calm enough to make Preston look nervous. Your Honor, Mrs. Brooks is capable. That has never been in dispute. Her capability is not a permission slip for Mr. Hale to drain a joint account, hide the funds through a connected entity, and pressure her to sign a settlement drafted with input from the woman he intended to move in with. Madison's face tightened. Preston shifted in his chair. Darius placed copies of the transfer records into evidence, then the email thread, then the settlement draft with Madison's comments still attached. Do not give her time to think. Once she is broke, she will sign anything. The judge read those lines twice. The second time, the silence in the room felt heavier. Preston leaned toward his attorney, whispering quickly, but there was no smooth way to explain cruelty written in plain English. Then Preston made the mistake of speaking for himself. Celeste has her own company, he said, trying to sound reasonable. She is not some helpless woman. She has money. She hid that from me. Celeste finally looked at him, not with hate, not even with shock, just with the sadness of someone watching a person reveal exactly who they are. Darius turned slightly toward the judge. Mrs. Brooks built that company with separate funds, separate contracts, and years of work Mr. Hale dismissed as unimportant. Her success does not erase his conduct. The judge removed her glasses and looked directly at Preston. Mr. Hale, this court is not here to punish your wife for being better prepared than you expected. Madison's hand slipped away from Preston's arm. It was a small movement, but Celeste saw it. Preston did too. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered the disputed accounts temporarily frozen, required full financial disclosure, and warned Preston's attorney that any further pressure tactics would be taken seriously. Celeste walked out of the courtroom with her legs still a little unsteady, but her back straight. She did not feel victorious yet. She felt awake. Behind her, Preston stood in the hallway, staring at the order in his hands, finally understanding that the woman he tried to corner had brought him to the one place where his performance could not save him. The news did not break like gossip. It moved quietly, the way real money moves, through private emails, calendar holds, and phone calls where people lowered their voices without knowing why. 3 days after the hearing, Brooks Strategic Group announced a partnership with North Star Meridian, a major investment fund known for backing women-led companies across the country. The press release was short, professional, almost boring to anyone who did not understand what it meant. Preston understood. He sat in his office reading it twice, then a third time, his coffee going cold beside his keyboard. Celeste was not just running a small consulting company. She had built something that people he spent years chasing were now lining up to work with. By noon, Evelyn Grant had forwarded the same announcement to the partnership group with one sentence. Please review all current client conflicts involving Brooks Strategic Group. Preston stared at that email until the words felt personal. By evening, he showed up at the annual Lakeshore Capitol Gala in a black suit that usually made him feel untouchable. This was the kind of room he loved, full of polished floors, soft jazz, crystal glasses, and men who measured one another by who got approached first. In past years, Preston walked in and people turned. They shook his hand, asked about his deals, praised his instincts. Tonight, they looked through him. Martin Keller saw him near the bar and gave a tight nod before turning back to another conversation. A founder Preston had once advised smiled politely, then excused herself. Even Madison, standing beside him in a silver dress, seemed less certain than usual. Maybe we should leave early, she whispered. Preston kept his eyes on the crowd. No, I belong here. But the words sounded thinner than he wanted them to. Then the room shifted. It was not loud. No one gasped. No music stopped. But attention moved, clean and sudden, toward the entrance. Celeste Brooks stepped into the ballroom wearing a deep emerald gown under a tailored black coat. Her hair swept back, her face calm. She did not arrive on the arm of a billionaire. She did not need a man to announce her value. Darius walked a few steps behind her, along with her chief financial officer, her operations director, and two women Preston recognized from North Star Meridian. They were not escorting her. They were arriving with her. That difference made Preston's chest tighten. Celeste moved through the room with quiet ease, greeting people by name, accepting handshakes from investors who had barely looked at Preston all night. A woman from North Star touched Celeste's arm and said, "Everyone is excited about what you are building." Then Martin Keller crossed the floor, not toward Preston, but toward Celeste. "Ms. Brooks," he said warmly, "we have been waiting for you." Preston felt Madison's hand slip from his sleeve. He looked at Celeste, trying to connect the woman in front of him with the wife he had ignored at breakfast tables, talked over at dinners, and dismissed in rooms where she had been smarter than everyone present. He remembered her laptop open late at night, her quiet phone calls, the folders she closed whenever he walked in, not out of fear, but because he never cared enough to ask. He had thought she was shrinking. She had been building. Celeste's eyes met his from across the room. There was no anger in them. That was worse. Anger would have meant he still had a place in her story. Her calm told him he had become a lesson. Preston took one step toward her, ready to say her name, ready to explain, ready to make the room believe he had always known who she was. But before he reached her, Celeste's phone rang. She listened for a few seconds, then looked at Darius. His face softened into the smallest smile. The preliminary financial order had come through, and Preston was about to learn that losing her respect was only the first thing he could never recover. By the next morning, the court order was no longer just a document in Darius Coleman's briefcase. It was sitting in Preston Hale's inbox, stamped, filed, and impossible to charm away. He had been ordered to return the full amount taken from the joint account, cover Celeste's legal fees connected to the emergency filing, and submit a complete financial disclosure under court supervision. The holding account he thought would keep the money clean was frozen. The Keller transaction was suspended. At his firm, the internal review that he had called a misunderstanding became something heavier, something spoken about behind closed doors while people stopped meeting his eyes in the hallway. Madison disappeared first in small ways. She stopped answering during lunch. Then she stopped coming by the office. By the end of the week, Preston saw online that she had attended a charity dinner across town with another man whose last name opened different doors. It should have hurt. Instead, it embarrassed him. That was when he finally understood the kind of loyalty he had mistaken for love. 2 weeks later, Preston stood outside the new Brooks Strategic Group office on Michigan Avenue, looking up at the name on the glass door like it belonged to someone he had never met. Celeste Brooks, founder and chief executive officer. Inside, people moved with purpose. Phones rang. A woman laughed near the reception desk. Sunlight came through the tall windows and spilled across polished floors. Not flashy, not wasteful, just solid. Real. Celeste stepped out of a conference room holding a folder against her side. For a moment, Preston saw the woman who once made coffee in their kitchen at 6 in the morning, who once asked if he had eaten, who once believed his dreams deserved room in her life. Then he saw the woman standing in front of him now, calm, tired in a human way, but not broken. "Celeste," he said. His voice sounded smaller than he expected. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him for a long second. "You owe me more than that. But the court is handling the rest." He swallowed. "I did not know you had built all this." Celeste gave a soft, sad smile. "That was the problem, Preston. You never cared enough to know." He looked down, shame finally reaching places pride had protected for years. "I was scared," he said. "I thought if you had your own power, there would be nothing keeping you with me." Celeste's face softened, but only a little. "Love was supposed to keep me there. Respect was supposed to keep me there. You chose control instead." The words landed quietly, and that made them harder to escape. Preston tried one last time. "Is there any part of us that can be fixed?" Celeste looked past him, through the glass walls, at the team waiting for her, at the life she had built in silence while he mistook her patience for permission. "You did not lose me when I became successful," she said. "You lost me when you decided I had to be powerless to be yours." She walked back into her office without slamming a door, without raising her voice, without giving him a scene he could turn into another story about himself. Preston stood there alone until the receptionist gently asked if he needed anything else. He shook his head and left. Outside, Chicago was loud and bright, people rushing to trains, cabs sliding through traffic, the city carrying on without caring who had learned their lesson too late. Inside, Celeste returned to her meeting, placed the folder on the table, and took her seat at the head of it. She did not feel like revenge. She felt like peace, and peace had cost her more than money ever could. Because sometimes the greatest fortune a woman builds is not the one in her accounts. It is the quiet certainty that no one gets to decide her value after they failed to see it.